Do you remember that, sister? What we discussed
Yes.
last week? Okay. So
Yes.
today's discussion is in continuation with what we discussed last week. So to start off with a summary, last week we started with how in the Old Testament the 10th plague, where the plague of all the firstborn was to be killed, and the only way for the Jewish people or the Hebrew speaking people to be saved is to sacrifice a lamb and then have a Passover meal. And then the Lord called this as a Passover festival. We know that, right? And we also
Yes.
saw how that was directly related to the sacrifice of Jesus. So, in today's session, in today's week, we will be looking a little more deeper into the sacrifice of Christ. So, where we will begin the sacrifice of Christ is we will straight away start from the time that the Lord offered Himself to be sacrificed. So, let's begin with a question. The question is, who killed, or who was the one who killed Jesus? Well, let me put it across this way. Who crushed Jesus? Who are the ones who crushed Jesus? Go ahead, sister. It's okay. You can say.
I don't know if I'm right, but can I say the Pharisees?
The Pharisees. Well, yes, the Pharisees wanted to kill Christ, kill Jesus. The Romans wanted to kill Jesus, but the book of Isaiah, chapter 53, verses 10 says it was God's plan to crush Jesus. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 10. So, why did God plan to crush Jesus? What was the use of it? Why should he even crush Jesus? Well, we will be able to find this in much detail at the end of today's discussion, because today's discussion will give a lot of insights into the sacrifice of Christ. Why did he come on earth and then have to give himself and then have to be killed and died on a cross? Well, many a times I've heard, for all Christians, we all say that he died for my sins. Yes, that's true. But in what sense did Jesus die for our sins? Does it mean that if he has already died for my sins 2,000 years ago, should I now be sinless? And all my sins, those the sins that I commit in my future, is all forgiven? And if it is all forgiven, then can I commit sins freely because he has already given his life? Well, these are the questions that has arisen in much of the non-Christian minds of people who actually want to have a conversation with Christians. And when these questions are brought up, most of the times we Christians, we stumble. Is because we really don't know what it is. Like in the book of Isaiah chapter 53 verses 10, it says it was the Lord's plan to crush Jesus. So why did God plan to crush Jesus? Well, that's the first question that we have in here for today. And let's go a little bit deeper. So we'll start straight away from the Garden of Gethsemane. So, what happened in the Garden of Gethsemane? Now, Jesus finishes his Passover meal with how many apostles, how many disciples? It was 11, because Judas just left away, right? So, Jesus finishes his Passover meal, Passover supper, and then they all come to the Garden of Gethsemane. He has some of his apostles to be stationed near the garden, and then he goes alone and he starts to pray. Now, this garden itself has a lot of connectivity to it. Why did Jesus, in fact, come to the garden? Why should he come and pray to the garden at the end? Well, if you look at the story, if you look at the incident where it all begun in the book of Genesis, when we see the creation and we see the fall of man, the Adam, it started from the garden. And here, Jesus is also finishing what Adam started in the garden. He's finishing it back in the same garden, but not in the same Eden garden, but a garden, right? We know that. So Jesus is here, he's praying, and here he prays. This is the most important prayer. He says that, "Oh Father, if you will, let this cup pass away from me." Does it mean that Jesus was scared and then he goes and prays to his father, saying that, "Oh Father, let this cup pass over from me. If you will take away this cup from me." Is that what Jesus meant? Because the verses also says that Jesus neither stumbled or neither he fell back. He didn't want to go back. Whatever he came, he wanted it to be accomplished, and he very well knew about this. Well, when he was coming with his disciples and his apostles on the way to Jerusalem, he was always telling them, right, the Son of Man will now go to Jerusalem and he will be handed over to the sinners, and then he will be crucified, and then on the third day he will raise back to life, which means Jesus really knew what was happening. And if he knew what was happening, why then did he have to pray to the Father, saying that, "Oh Father, if you will let this cup pass away from me"? Does it mean that he was scared? No, absolutely not. If we look into the mind of Christ, when I say the mind of Christ, from the perspective of Jesus Christ himself, what did Jesus mean here? He says, "Oh Father, the work that I am supposed to do right now and the work that I am coming to do now is much of a great work, is because it is rescuing humanity from death." And how that happens is what we will look at the end of today's session. So rescuing humanity from death. Oh God, it's a much greater work. And if you at any point in time, oh my Father, you think that I am not worthy of this, please let this cup pass away from me, not by my will but by yours. So here we see the simplicity, the humility of Jesus Christ. He was the person humble, to the depths of what he can, and he was very humble. So this is how he approaches. And now in the Garden of Gethsemane, quickly he starts. There were many incidents that happened in the Garden of Gethsemane, and one such incident is recorded in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verses 44. Sister, if you have a Bible in hand with you, I would recommend you to kindly read the scriptures. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 22, verses 44.
Luke 22,
44.
44. Okay. 1 minute. Luke 22, 44. Sorry.
No problem, sister.
Okay. Luke 22, 44.
Oh,
Okay. It reads, "And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly. Then
right.
his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground."
Right. So here Jesus is praying in the garden, and then quickly his sweat is falling down like blood. But truly, no one sweats blood, right? Luke records this. So Luke is a doctor, and he is actually recording this in the terminology of a doctor. Say, for instance, the book of Acts. The book of Acts was written by Luke. So if you look at Judas's the death of Judas, well, at one side it says that Judas hung on a tree and then he died, but then in the book of Acts it says that Judas fell down from the tree and all his bowels came out. So then the real question came: is did Judas die by hanging on the tree, or did he try to hang and he was fallen down, and then his internal organs burst open? So Luke, from the doctor's perspective, as in many a times, recorded a medical condition of what had happened, and this is exactly precisely what he is doing here. So here what happens, while if you're looking at the screen now, this is exactly what had happened to Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. What you see here is called as a sweat gland. You see all that nerves, all that nerves is like together. That's a sweat gland. That's where sweat is produced. Now, when a person is in an extreme physical or emotional stress, these sweat glands will be ruptured, or the nerves will be ruptured. When I say ruptured, they have a little bit of damage within them, and then the blood starts coming out of these vessels, from the nerve vessels. And then what happens is the blood drops then mixes with the sweat and comes out through the pore as blood drop, which means on that particular night when Christ was in the Garden of Gethsemane and when he was in prayer, we can only imagine the stress that his mind and his physical condition could have gone to, which is why in Matthew chapter 26, verses 38, he says, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful till death." And he knew all of this is going to happen. So here's where we begin. Jesus is arrested. Now let's pay a little more closer attention. Jesus is arrested, and then he's taken to about, in that very same night, he's taken to different courts. He's been granted the sentence of death, and then he's killed. So we will start dissecting it one by one. So he's captured, and then he's taken to the very first court. So here he's taken to the court of, at that point in time, was Annas. He was there. He was the high priest. So he was actually not the high priest, but then Caiaphas was the high priest. So he's here. Now Jesus is taken to the first court. So let's remember this. He's taken to the very first court, the court of the Jews, to be justified. So it's about midnight, and usually at midnight you're not supposed to inquire a criminal. You're not supposed to inquire any kind of cases that comes to the high priest. It only happens during the daylight. But then if we look at the unjust that had happened that night, they straight away barge into the priest house. They wake him up, and then they quickly call him up, and then they say, "Hey, look, the Nazareth of the Yeshua of Nazareth, that the one that we were looking for, is been found. So here we've got him. Well, go ahead and give him the justification, or go ahead and give us the justice, and give him the right punishment that is needed." So they straight away come, and this is the place that Jesus was slapped. Well, in his ministry of about 3.5 years, many a times the Jews, they picked up stones to kill Jesus, but he has vanished. But here, in this exact point of time, he didn't choose to disappear from their eyes, but instead he stood there. Now the question is, why did Jesus take all of these beatings? Why did he go up to the cross? Why did he give up the life? We can simply say that he died for our sins, but how? Why should all that happen? Now that's the climax of today's discussion. And from there, so this is the first court of the Jews that Jesus is taken, dragged in chains to be judged. Now, just because this person with whom Jesus is now standing, Anna, does not have the power or does not have the rights to pass judgment, is because he is not the serving high priest at that point in time. What happens is, exactly on the same midnight, Jesus is then once again chained and taken to the second court. Now Jesus goes to the second court. Now let's remember this. This is where he goes to Caiaphas. All right. So he's taken to Caiaphas. Now quickly Caiaphas comes out, and then he asks, what are the charges that are presented against this man? So people come, and they start to testify against Jesus, but none of the testification or none of the testimony that they give against Jesus was valid. But then finally there were two witnesses who actually comes. Now I'm going to read from a chapter of from Matthew chapter 26, okay, from verses 59 to 61. Dear brothers and sisters, please pay a little bit close attention to what is being said here. Matthew chapter 26, verses 59 to 61. So I'm going to read again Matthew chapter 26, 59 to 61. So here's what has happened. Now, inside the leading priest, that is, they are inside, the leading priest and the entire high council were trying to find witnesses who would lie about Jesus, which means they are trying to find witnesses, that the ones that are going to lie about Jesus, so they could put him to death. But even though they found many who agreed to give false witness, they could not use anyone's testimony. Now look at the next line. Finally, two men came forward who declared, this man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Now let's take a pause. Didn't Jesus say these words? that he will be able to rebuild the temple in 3 days? Didn't he not say, or did he say, or did he not say? Let's
He
look at.
said it.
He said that, right? But here,
Yeah.
Matthew is saying that these were false witnesses. Not just Matthew, even Mark also says the same thing. Mark chapter 14, verses 57. I will quickly read out from it. Mark chapter 14, verses 57. It says, "Finally, some men stood up and gave this false testimony." So it is a false testimony. Now, the next verse says, what is the false testimony they gave? "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without human hands.'" But Jesus did say this, that he will raise the temple back in 3 days. But why then does Matthew and also Mark, both of them, say that this is a false testimony? Because we know that Jesus said. So which one is true? Matthew and Mark, are they ones the one they're saying the truth? Or which is true? Well, Jesus did say this, but not exactly. What did
Mm.
Jesus say? It's given in John chapter 2, verses 9. You know what Jesus said? Jesus said, "Hey, listen, the temple that Solomon built, if you go ahead and destroy the temple, and I will raise it back in 3 days." He never made a statement that he himself will destroy the temple and then raise it back in 3 days. You get the difference, sister? Jesus never ever said that he will destroy the temple and then raise it back. He said, "You destroy the temple and I will raise it back." So the false testimony here is that just a simple alteration of the words. Instead of saying that Jesus said that you destroy the temple and I will raise it back in 3 days, the false testimony is that Jesus himself will destroy and then he himself will raise back. And this is how they had played tricks on using the same words that Jesus quoted, with just making some changes. And all of this is happening in the second court. Now here's a most important thing that happened. If you're paying close attention, please look into this. This is the most important and vulnerable action that happens here in the second court, where they are having him for trial. Now they blind him up, they spit on him, they put him to shame, they disgrace him. We know all of that, right? But what is something that we don't know here is that, according to the custom of the Jews, if a person is found blaspheming against God, blaspheme is talking against the law of Moses or talking against God, then the Jews, what they would do then is, if it is a man, they will pull out all of his beard, which means they are going to tear the beard off his face. Imagine, when a beard is torn off the face, it will rip apart the flesh. All of the flesh that is here, all of the muscles that is near the jaw bones will be ripped open, will just peel off. It'll just come out. It's because you catch a person by the beard and then you start pulling out the beard. Well, I'm not making this up, because in Isaiah chapter 50, verses 6, there is a prophecy that says that Jesus offered up his beard for the ones who wanted to pull them out. So literally, in the second court, what had happened is he's been blindfolded, he's been beaten, bruised, and not just that, his beard is plucked off, and probably, in all fairness, that his flesh and the muscles that were there on his face is torn out, is just simply come out. And all that is left here is just bones. It's just bones. And this is exactly what happened in the second court of trial. So we saw the first court, we saw the second court where he was inquired, and then the Jews declared him to be blaspheming against God. But according to the customs of the Jews, if a man is found guilty of blaspheming against God, he is supposed to be stoned to death. But here, Jesus was not stoned to death, is because the Pharisees at that point in time, and also the Sadducees, they didn't want Jesus to be stoned to death and give him a title of a martyr, and have many of his followers follow him. No, they didn't want that to happen. They want Jesus's death to be a lesson to anyone who tries to oppose the Pharisees. And because of that, they straight away hand over him to the Roman government. So they drag him the very same night. He's probably in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's arrested about 11:30 in the night. He's taken to the first court. They trial him, and then they beat him up, they strike him up, and then he's taken out to the second court. Second court, he's again struck, blindfolded, disgraced, spat upon, he's put in shame, and then his beard is plucked off, and now he's left with bleeding face, and all of his flesh is just torn out. And in the same night, at the same night, he's already battered, he's bruised, he's dehydrated because of all the dragging. He had no food because during the supper, all that he had is just a supper meal. He's exhausted from sleepless nights, and then he's dragged across Jerusalem. Now they take him to what is called as a fortress, and this is a fortress where the governor Pilate uh, Pilate was there. So they drag him to Pilate. It was almost to be about daybreak, at the dawn. So it's a dawn, at the time of the dawn. They drag him to Pilate. Pilate hears this commotion, and he quickly runs looking to what had happened. So they hold this man called Yeshua of Nazareth, and they ask Pilate, this man had committed a great crime. So Pilate now asks, what is the crime that he committed? Look at the way that the Jewish people had actually played with their words. When they had taken Jesus to high priest, they said that Jesus said he will destroy the temple and he will rebuild it back. But when they bring him to Pilate, they don't accuse him of destroying the temple and rebuilding. They give a different acquisition. So what they give here for on Jesus, what they complain against Jesus here is that they say that this man, Yeshua of Nazareth, is rebelling against the government of Rome. He is advising and teaching people not to pay taxes to Caesar. But well, just few days back, Jesus said to Peter, pay what, render to Caesar what is Caesar, and render to God what is God. He did say that. But here they give a different acquisition on Christ himself. So 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 Pilate listens to this, and then Pilate asks, there was an important statement that they make. They say that this man, who Jesus, that is Yeshua of Nazareth, he has started the rebel right from Galilee, all the way from Galilee. Now where is Galilee? If you look at the map of Israel, Galilee is right on the top, the north. That's where the Sea of Galilee was. It's near a mountain called the Mount of Hermon, and that's where Sea of Galilee was. So they say right from Galilee all the way to Judea, what this man is doing is he's advising and teaching people not to pay taxes, and he is creating a rebellious group. Now, the minute Pilate heard that this man is from Galilee, Pilate knew that Jesus is innocent, right? Because they have spies all around Rome, and they know who's teaching what. So now Pilate wants to quickly get rid of this commotion. So he says, well, if this man is from Galilee, the district of Galilee does not fall under my jurisdiction. It doesn't fall under my area that I control. So there is a king who is actually in charge of in Galilee, and apparently the king has now come here to Jerusalem to visit the city for a certain work. So you might want to take Jesus to that person, and they then send Jesus to King Herod. Now, which court is this? This is the fourth court. You see, all this is happening on that one particular night itself. He's arrested around like 11 p.m. or midnight. He's taken to the first court. They slap him, beat him. He's taken to the second court. They blindfold him, they beat him, put him to shame, spit on him, and most of all, they've ripped open his face by pulling out all the beard, and then they drag him to Pilate, the Roman court, the Roman government, and Pilate then sends him to Herod. So this is the fourth court that Jesus is taken in that one same night when he was arrested. Herod Herod, on the other hand, he was very desperate to see Jesus. Well, I would say he was longing to hear the words of Jesus. As soon as he heard that Jesus is coming to his court, he was very happy and he wants to hear the words. So they bring Jesus to Herod. Now Herod sits on his throne and then he asks Yeshua of Nazareth. He says, "Well, I've been waiting to hear words from you. Why don't you speak to me?" Well, Jesus was just still. He didn't even open his mouth. Herod kept on asking and prompting and persuading Jesus to speak something. But Jesus never even uttered a single word. Herod was very furious. Herod beat up Jesus, saying that you're putting me to shame in front of everyone who is in my court. Well, why didn't Jesus speak? He could have spoken, right? No. What Jesus did was right, because if Jesus had spoken to King Herod would have immediately converted into the follower of Christ, or King Herod, after hearing the words of Jesus, would have set him free. The most possible thing is he would have set Jesus free, and he would have really knocked or whacked the people who got him to the court. So Jesus knew about this. If I open my mouth and speak something, Herod is going to set me free. And I don't want to be set free. This is the mind of Jesus. I don't want to be set free because if I don't die right now, this is the exact time that I'll have to die. If I don't die right now, there is no redemption. So he kept his mouth so quiet. Well, this is what as Christians we should also learn to do. Learn to speak when we are supposed to speak, and learn not to speak when it is really not needed to speak. The discernment of when to and when not to is very, very important. So now Herod, after beating Jesus up, he sends Jesus back. He sends Jesus back to Pilate. So this is the fifth court, which means the first, second, third, fourth Herod, and now fifth is Pilate once again. So they bring Jesus back to Pilate. Now Pilate, he couldn't refuse, because on that particular day, Herod and Pilate, they became friends. They were actually a deadly enemies. They were deadly enemies. They didn't even speak to each other, but because of Jesus' trial, the enemies that they were are now friends. uh, this is a very important lesson that we should also learn, that Jesus, even at the time of his most difficult situation, even at the time of being he's going to be crucified, he actually united two people together. But on the other hand, followers of Jesus Christ today, Christians, we don't. Even if I die, I will never let you both to be together. Well, that's my attitude, right? That's the attitude of we human beings. We say that no matter what, I will never make peace with you. No matter what, I will never let you both be in peace. Well, Jesus did the opposite. Even in his time of tribulation, he let two enemies become friends. And it's a very great lesson we'll have to learn. Now, they bring Pilate here. Now, Pilate is standing and Jesus comes in front of Pilate. Now, Pilate gives an instruction. He says, he calls his legionnaires and he says, just beat this man up and bring him. He didn't say anything else. Scourge him and bring him. But dear brothers and sisters, people who came to scourge Jesus, you know how many people came actually to beat Jesus up? Is about 900 to 1200 soldiers. Where is this given? It is given in Matthew chapter 27 verses 27. It says the full band, a full band had come out. In certain translation it says regiment, in certain translation it says battalion, and the Roman battalion is about 900 to 1200 soldiers who were stationed in the fortress of San Antonio, which is the place where Pilate was. Now all of these people, frontline soldiers, legionnaires, ruthless people, they come and Jesus totally ripped open here. Pilate didn't say beat him up, rip him open, and then bring him up. He only said scourge him and then bring him out. But the way that they beat Jesus is terrifically is terrifying. Let's take a look at it in a little more detail. It's going to give us shivers is because if we understand what is this is too much. So how they beat up this man is, if you look at this, if you look at this picture that you're seeing here, they actually stretch a man. The Romans, they stretch so that right from his shoulder to all the way to until his ankle and the calf muscles are completely visible, and then only then they start to beat the man right from the shoulders till the ankle. Well, there is a scripture that says the way that Jesus was beaten up. It says that they plowed his back. You know what plowing is? You look at the farmers, how they plow the land and then they plant the seeds. You plow the land, right? That is how Jesus' back was plowed, it seems. It says in Psalms chapter 129, verses 3, and it also says in the book of Isaiah, chapter 50, verses 6. They plowed his back, and yet he was silent like a lamb. Remember the lamb we saw last week? He was silent like a lamb. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 7. He was silent like a lamb that is led to slaughter. And they completely ripped open. Bible scholars also say that jesus's flesh Jesus' flesh was hanging down like ribbons, ribbons, right? Ribbons that is used to tie up women hair. You use the ribbons for many many other things. It's like thread. His back, the flesh from his back was hanging down like threads, like ribbons. That's how they plowed his back. Very very terrifying. And the instrument or the tools that they used to scourge Jesus was called as flagrum. It usually had it's also called as a nine tail, or nine tails of cat. It has spikes and bone pieces, glass pieces, sharp bones and sharp stones at the front of at the tip of each tails, and it had nine tails. They call this as a Roman flagrum. There's already a calculation which shows how many stitches is needed to tie up, to stitch a single wound from the scourge. We'll not go into the details of that, but then it was terrifying. Here, about 100 years back, about 100 years back, the Africans were scourged like this, and one single strike from the Roman scourge, this is how the back would look. What you see on your screen now, this is exactly what the back would look with the one single strike of the nine tail scourge, the Roman flagrum. Imagine Jesus being beaten up and beaten up again and again. The Bible says until which part or which point he was beaten up. So let's look at our back, and imagine this. You have the skin, and under your skin you have fat, and then you have a little bit of soft tissue, and finally you have the bone. They dug so deep that the skin was taken out, peeled out. The fat was completely taken out. The soft tissues and the muscles were all taken out. It was only the bones, dear brothers and sisters, only the bones that was left in his back. They dug up and they pulled and they ripped open everything that is possible. And it is also likely possible that Jesus was naked, because the Romans, if we look back in the history, Romans, it's a kind of a shame that they render to the person by scourging and ripping and beating him up, right? They don't let any clothes to be on that person. And Jesus here, we cannot see him, and he's near death. He's soaked in his own blood. They made joke of him, and then they take him to a place and he's seated. Why we are seeing all of this is because we're seeing the message of the cross. If you remember, that's where we started about 2 weeks ago, and today we're going to complete this. So next week we will look into something different. But the real question, what we started while we started today's discussion, is why should Jesus come and give his life? Why should he die on the cross? What is the exact purpose? Well, we all say that he died for my sins. Yes, that is true. But how and why? Why and how? To know that, we will have to see this, and then in the conclusion, we will know why and how did he do that, right? So Jesus is now half fainting. They put robes across around him, and then they place a stick in his hand. They tease him, and then what is called as a spina Christi. It's a wreath that is available in Jerusalem. It's made out of spikes, thorns. Thorns are about 5 to 6 inches in length. It's called spina Christi. So they weave a wreath around with these thorns. They put him over his skull on his face, and they strike him up. Not just that, they strike him up, and after striking him up, you remember the cloth the robe that they put on him. And now imagine this: Jesus' blood body is full of blood. His flesh is all like draped. It's all hanging down from his back. It's during a summer season, which means the heat is very high. They wrap him around with a cloth. Now what is going to happen? The robe is going to absorb all of the blood, and then the robe is likely to get stuck in his back because it's wet, right? It's moist of blood. And after they beat up Jesus, they'll have to they wanted to take away the robe. How are they going to take away the robe? They're going to snatch it away from his body. Imagine the leftover flesh from his back, which is stuck to his clothes. Now the robe, it's just going to peel off. It's terrifying. And he had to go through all of this. And then crown is placed on his head. They beat on his scalp. It's estimated about 150 pricks, 150 pricks of nails that could have gone into his scalp, and everything from his face starts to bleed. Now, Jesus is taken to a mountain called Golgotha, and that's the skull mountain where he was crucified. There is a long prophecy in the Old Testament about that. I'll give you a small hint, but we will look into this in another day. Now, why was Jesus crucified on this mount called Golgotha? If you go back, if you go back to the days of David and Goliath, right? David as a shepherd, David is a shepherd, and Goliath is like a big monster. David uses one single stone to kill Goliath, and Goliath's head was apparently buried under this skull island, under the skull mountain called Golgotha. What is the relation between this have to do with Jesus? There's a great example in this. David was a shepherd. Jesus was also a shepherd. When I say shepherd, not literally shepherd, he was also called as a shepherd. And Goliath as a beast, here we see Satan as that beast, which is very powerful in nature, but not powerful exactly like Jesus. And like David used a single stone to knock out Goliath, Jesus used a single life, only one life that he had, to knock out devil, to knock out Satan, right? In Genesis chapter 3, verses 15, there is a big prophecy that God himself prophesied during the time when Adam and Eve fell into sin. He said that I'm going to have a seed of a woman. There is a seed that will come of a woman, and that seed will crush your head. You remember that? Genesis chapter 3, verses 15. He will look at a serpent, and he'll pass the judgment to the serpent. He'll say, the seed of a woman, the man, will crush your head. And if you look at Goliath, his head was right under this Golgotha mount, on this mount. And Jesus, he's crucified right on top of it, which symbolizes Jesus, Jesus going to crush the head of the Satan. And we know Goliath typified Satan, and his head was buried under the Golgotha, and Jesus is crucified on top of it, which means the death of Jesus is going to bring a death blow to Satan, striking his head, crushing his head. There's a very detailed prophecy about that. We will definitely look into this next day. So now Jesus is sentenced to death. He had to walk all the way. I'm going to skip a lot of things, is because few things is not needed for today, but in the next deeper session we might want to study about it. And then on Jesus, when the cross was sent, what Pilate also does is he wants something to do, for what he wants to undo something, right? So then he writes the name of the crime that this person did. Usually what the Romans do is, when a man is crucified, they put the crime over their head in a name board. So what is given here? It says Jesus Nazarenus Rexus Judea Roma. That's what was written there in the Hebrew tongue, which means Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And then he puts the name board, and then Jesus is dragged out. Now Jesus is dragged He's taken out. We'll just skip through all of this, and here we come to the final conclusion. Now here Jesus is going to be crucified. Now the nails that were used, usually the nails that is used to crucify to crucify a criminal, is the Romans always used a rusted nail, because the minute a rusted nail is peered into your hands or into any parts of the body, the rust from that metal will pass through the blood streams, and then it will create an internal infection leading to high temperature and high fever. So the person on the cross is going to suffocate a lot, a lot, a lot. Now where was Jesus's arms nailed? It was not exactly in the palm. It was in the wrist, where you have the tendon bones. It was in the wrist where the nails were nailed. And then exactly the same thing while you look into these images. And then also on his feet. In his feet, it was in between the bones. Now, after they have nailed, what exactly happens is, when a person is nailed to the cross, his fingers or his hands will become as that of a crow. A crow, crow, right? The bird that flies. What they call that is, they call it as a clawed finger, or a crow clawed finger. And this is exactly how it becomes, because you're not able to move your wrist and your fingers, is because this thick nail is right in between, in the center of the tendon. And the way that they did is, they were very highly trained for this, is because you have the main nerve here, the median nerve that passes. It passes directly to your heart. And if this main median nerve is ruptured or broken, the person will instantly die of bleeding. So they will ensure that that nerve does not is not impacted. That's how they crucified a person. They're well trained. So now Jesus is in fury pain, and every time his heart pumps out blood, right from the top of his head to the tip of the toe, he is feeling tremendous pain. He feels pain. It shoots the most sensitive, because all the nerves in his body now is feeling the pain. It travels to his fingers, his arms, his shoulders, his pectoral muscles are paralyzed, because the minute you start holding it up like this for a very long time, your pectoral muscles that's here, it becomes paralyzes. It paralyzes itself, because the arms have then become fatigue, which means it's tired. Then there are great waves of cramps that happens in this muscle, and it sweeps over. The pain keeps sweeping the nerves that comes here, right? Because you're stretched out, all the nerves starts to knot. When I say knot, they starts to knot. It's called as knotting. Then the minute it starts knotting, all these nerves burst open. There's a throbbing pain, there's relentless pain, uh, absolutely tremendous pain. The book of Psalms talks about this. Psalms chapter 22, from verse 15 to verse 17, it says Jesus had no strength. He was pierced, and his bones could be counted. Is because his flesh, remember the flesh, his back was completely plowed. Now his fingers are clawed, and his pectoral muscles are all paralyzed. Now, how does a person die when he's on a cross? This is the most important thing. How does a person die when he is on a cross? Now, when a person is on a cross, he cannot breathe. There is difficulty in breathing, is because the person hangs down from the cross. If you're looking into the screen, in the image, you see the lungs, right? The lungs will be compressed, and because the lungs are compressed, you will not be able to fill oxygen into the lungs. It's very hard to get oxygen. So if a person will have to take out oxygen, or get an oxygen into his system, what he will have to do is, he will have to pull his entire body weight right up, because he's hanging down. He will have to pull it right up, which means he has to drag himself like this. And the wood on which Jesus was crucified, it is not the wood like the ones that we use in our homes and offices. It's not a smooth finished wood. They call it in different names. They call it even as a dogwood. Many different names have been attributed to the wood, but the wood is unfinished wood, which means it's got rough edges. The wood itself has pieces of wood sticking out, and it's very rough. The minute Jesus wants to breathe, an oxygen, right? All he has to do is he has to drag himself right up, and only then take up oxygen and then come back down. So, imagine this, right? From 9 a.m. is when he was crucified, and 3 p.m. is when he lays down his life. This is exactly what we saw last week. The time when the sacrifice of the lamb happens in tabernacle, the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice, which happens between twilight. It's called as twilight. Twilight means between two evenings. The Jews had two evenings, and that's exactly 3 p.m. So, in the Old Testament, when the lamb was sacrificed, it was the same time. And in the New Testament, the lamb Jesus Christ, when he is also getting sacrificed, it is exactly the same time. And every time Jesus had to breathe oxygen, he had to lift his entire body weight right up above. Imagine his back. His back is already plowed out. There's no flesh left. It's completely bleeding. He has to put his back against the cross and surface it up. So every time he goes up and every time he comes down, the leftover flesh or whatever behind is all going to get pasted on that wood. Imagine the tremendous pain that he's going through at this exact point in time. He's not able to relieve his pain. It's in his chest, in his arm. He has to push upwards. The his back has to rub against the wood. The full weight of the body is on his arms, and specifically on his legs, which is on the feet. The searing agony transfers from the wrist to the feet every time he does that. And like we have all seen in the movies, Jesus was not crucified like very high above. Romans, they never did that. Romans will crucify a man at your height. When you're passing by, you should be able to see the man face to face, and that's when you know what his crimes are, and you will realize that you should never do that. And they had a practice of crucifying people in the borders of cities. Why borders? That's when travelers will travel from one place to another place, and people who come in and go out in the borders of the city, they will know that this is the crime the person has done. They will actually let him in a condition of being naked. Well, I can only imagine that Jesus also would have been put into a tremendous shameful situation, unless there is something else that has happened over there. So now Jesus crucified, his blood is pouring out. The stink or the smell of the blood, the stink of the blood is going to draw a lot of birds of the air. They're not going to keep quiet. And then you have two more thieves right on the right, and then on the left, everything is exposed. People come and spit at him. They even blaspheme at him. They make fun of him. They throw out all sorts of words at him. They shame him. And insects are all surrounded, and he's in an utter condition of being humiliated. And that's how Jesus is. Now, finally, dear brothers and sisters, how did Jesus die? This is the most important thing, and um, I'm sure that many people might have not told this to you, or might have told this to you. Jesus died of a heart burst. There is biblical verses for that. His heart bursted when he was about to die. Now, here's what exactly happens. If a person is on the cross, a crucified person, they don't die in 6 hours. They don't die in 6 hours. They in fact survive on the cross for about 3, 4, 5 days. That's how the Romans designed crucifixion. Well, it was not the Romans who first invented crucifixion. It was it actually came down not even from the Greeks. It came down from the Persians. The Persians. After Babylonian Empire came the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, Persians were the ones who actually wanted. They were the ones who used to impale a person on a wood. Remember the story of Esther, Mordecai. You remember that story of Haman, who was impaled to a wood, to a 75-foot pole. They were the ones who actually invented it, and then it passed on to the Alexander kingdom, which was the Greek kingdom, and then it came to the Romans. But Romans were very talented when it comes to torturing people. They made very good use of this situation, and they reinvented crucifixion. And the way that they did is, if a person is crucified, he will remain on the cross for about 3, 4, 5 days, at least to a week. He will not die that easily. They will ensure that his last hours of pain on the cross is to the extensive of being extreme. That's how it was designed. But then Jesus died in 6 hours. I will give you biblical proofs for it. Now, how did Jesus die? When you are not able to breathe for a long hours, and you have limitless pains, you have cycles of twisting cramps, you're not able to get the required oxygen on the heart. What happens is, there is a layer of fat that gets formed. It's called as precardium in scientific terms. What it does is, it does not let the heart to pump. It starts to compress the pump a lot, because there is a loss of tissue fluids for Jesus. It has reached critical condition. His heart is compressed, is not able to pump, and is pumping thick and heavy blood into his tissues. His lungs are already tortured. It's making up a frantic effort to gasp up all the small gulps of oxygen that is it can. His tongue is completely dried up. Now, the most important thing happens. It's given in the book of Psalms, chapter 22, verses 14. It says, my heart melted in between my ribs. What had happened? Exactly at 3 p.m., the heart that Jesus's heart was pumping blood, it stopped to pump, is because it can no longer pump. And that is why in the book of Psalms chapter 22 verse 14, it says his heart melted in between his ribs. And this is exactly when he was crucified. His heart just explodes and he stops. Now his life is completely gone out. And that is what it was the will of the Lord to crush Jesus. Isaiah chapter 53, verses 10. Now, the question that I have for God is why? Why did Jesus have to suffer such a torturous death? What is the real use of it? Why should he? Why should he even die like this? Well, if you look at Jesus in Isaiah chapter 53, verses 14, it says people were not able to recognize Jesus as a human being. That's how disfigured he was. When they saw him, they thought he was an alien. They could not find out that he's a human being. He was completely disfigured, completely disfigured. But the beauty of Jesus, how beautiful Jesus is actually mentioned in the book of Songs of Solomon, chapter 5, verses 10 to 16. It does not talk about Solomon, dear brothers and sisters. It talks about the beauty of Jesus. Songs of Solomon, chapter 5, verses 10 to 16. It starts right from his hair, and then it ends in his toe, and then it says how beautiful he was. But if you look at Isaiah chapter 52 verses 14, it says he had no human figure. He did not even appear like a human being. Why did Jesus have to suffer such a horrible death? What was the purpose? And that's the purpose that we are going to study today in First Corinthians, like we ended last week, where Apostle Paul compares the lamb. You remember the 10th plague, the lamb that was sacrificed, and then we have Jesus, a lamb in the New Testament. And Apostle Paul says that the Passover lamb that was sacrificed in the Old Testament is Jesus. That's what he says in First Corinthians chapter 5 verses 7. He says that Jesus is our Passover lamb. That's how he puts. Now let's go a little bit into into the basics. Dear brothers and sisters, we are almost about the verge of ending. 10 more minutes, but this is the most important thing, and I would request you to pay even more closer attention to this. Now, Adam, God created Adam. We are going to the Eden Garden. God created Adam, and from Adam, God created Eve. Now, when God created Adam, God did not put immortal life into Adam. Let's learn the difference. Immortal life and eternal life, they are two different things. They're distinctly different. They are not the same. Immortal life means you will never ever die. Eternal life means you will have life until the time God decides to take that life away. But you can live for eternity till the time there is an end. Immortal life is different. When God created Adam, Adam was not immortal, which means Adam had a mortal life, but then he had eternal life until the day sin does not, until the day he does, sin comes to him. Till that time he will live eternally. Let's imagine Adam never sinned. Until till this day, Adam would have not died. He would have lived eternally, because sin did not enter into him. But sin entered, and then his life just cut short. So firstly, we'll have to know that Adam was not immortal, but he had life. God created Adam. Now that's done, right? Now what had happened? Adam made a sin. Remember this, dear brothers. Adam sinned, and because of Adam's sin, death came into this world, right? Because of sin only, right, death came into this world. And because of death coming into the world, every people on earth today is dying. Everyone dies on earth. Now the question is, if Adam had sinned, why are we punished? Well, God should have passed the judgment only to Adam, right? Because Adam sinned, and it is right, it's very just for God to give the penalty of death to Adam, and only let Adam die. Why did it get passed on to us? We never sin. Or why should it come to us? Well, it says, the Bible again says that there is no man who is righteous, and every man has sinned, which means everyone has sinned, and they have fallen short of life. Not just that. Let's look a little more deeper into this. Well, these are all genuine questions. Adam sinned. God, you passed the judgment to Adam. The judgment was death penalty. Why did it then get passed on to all humanity? It should have just stopped over there. Well, the real question then comes is, God tested Adam. Adam sinned. Okay, God gave him the penalty of death. What would have happened if God tested me? I would have definitely sinned. Then death comes to me. What would have happened if God had tested individually every human being? Everyone would have sinned, and everyone would have got the penalty of death, which is why God tested only one man, and he passed judgment to only one man, and from that one man all of them got judged. His entire human race got judged, and entire human race were pushed into the penalty of death. Now, this is where Jesus comes. Very, very important. This is the doctrine of Jesus Christ that we're studying today. It's very important. Now, how Apostle Paul designs this is in the First Corinthians, in the book of Corinthians, or the letter to the First Corinthians, chapter 15, verses 45. He starts off. He says, "Thus it was written, the first man Adam." You remember the Adam in the Garden of Eden? He goes there. The first man Adam became a living being, and now he also compares Jesus to Adam, and he calls Jesus as the last Adam, which means in the Bible we have two Adams. The Adam from Eden, and Jesus also is referred to as the last Adam. And then here he says, here Jesus is the second Adam, or the last Adam, has become a life-giving spirit. A life-giving spirit. How do we understand this? Let's make it a little more easier. I only said about 10 minutes. We're going to stop this a little more easier. Now, Adam sinned, right? Adam sinned. Please watch me, dear brothers and sisters. Adam sinned. Let's look at Romans chapter 5:12. Through one man, Adam, sin entered the world, and death came through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. Okay, so that's all clear. We understood that God tested Adam. Adam sinned. Death penalty was passed on to Adam, and because of that, all the generations, every children of Adam will die. That was a design of God. Everyone has to die. The entire human race were pushed into a condition of going into the death. Now this is where Jesus comes. Now, how do we understand where Jesus comes? Is again, Apostle Paul makes an important verse in the letter to the Timothy. Let's read this. This is the most important one. First Timothy chapter 2, verses 5 and 6. He says, "For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus." The second line is the most important: "Who gave himself a ransom for all." So Timothy brings up the exact teachings here. He says Jesus gave himself as a ransom for all. What does this mean? What is ransom? What is the meaning of ransom? Ransom simply means, I have something that belongs to you, and if you need it back, you will need to give a ransom for it. Well, it is to make it even more easier. You remember the kidnappers. When a kidnapper kidnaps a child or any of a family member, what does he demand for? He demands ransom. What is ransom? Ransom in Greek, it's called as anti-lutron. The word is called as anti-lutron. Anti-lutron means equal and corresponding price. It's an equal price. It's an equal price. Dear brothers and sisters, please pay very close attention to this, because this is the whole uh, core concept of the teachings of the Bible, the coming of Jesus Christ. Why did Jesus come? And this is why we were getting prepared for the last 2 weeks to know about this. So here he brings an important word called ransom. Ransom means equal and corresponding price. So it should be an equal price, a very equal price. Now Adam died. Okay, so I'm going back. Now Adam died. God wanted to restore the life of Adam back into humans, and that is why He selects Abraham, and that is why He selects the generation of Abraham. When the generation of Abraham, the Jews or the Hebrew-speaking people, were called out from the nation of Egypt, they come to Mount Sinai, right? And when they come to Mount Sinai, God gives them the covenant, the law covenant to the Jews. And the most important thing He does is He says, if anyone who follows these laws, if anyone who follows the laws, they will live by it, which means they will get back their life. That's the first step that God took to restore mankind back to life. But no one was able to follow the law. Not even a single person was able to follow the law. So no one was able to inherit life. Now next is where Jesus comes into the picture. Now this is where Jesus comes into the picture. How Jesus comes into the picture is, again, look at me so it becomes even more easier. I will go to the actual verse. um, let's look at this. No one was able to fulfill the law, right? Which means, if let's imagine, if Moses fulfilled the law, would he have got the life? Yes, absolutely, because God said that if you fulfill the law, you will get back your life. He says that by the law you will live by it. But no one was able to fulfill the law except for one man, and that one man was Jesus. That is why in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17, Jesus says, do not think I have come to abolish the law, but I have come to fulfill the law. Jesus says, I've come to fulfill the law. Now let's go to the book of the laws, the most important conclusion. With this, we will understand why Jesus came to sacrifice. Now, the book of the law, remember this, dear brothers and sisters, everyone thinks of God as a magic wand. They think that God can do everything like this. And that's why they expect instant gratification. The minute you pray to God, immediately we expect for results. No, God works within His own laws. God works within His own boundaries that He has set, the nature being His boundary. He never takes a course of action immediately, and He does not intervene. He does not intervene. Now, the law of God, this is how this is. So what is the law? What is the law means? Law means the mind of God. Whatever was in His mind, He gave it as law to the people. One of the law in the Old Testament that God gave was this. He said to the Jews, He said to the Israelites, hey, listen, it is a hand for a hand. If one person chops off your hand, make sure his hand goes away. You remember that law? If one person plucks out your eye, make sure his eye is also plucked out. If one person is killed, make sure the person who killed him is also killed. Which means he says hand for a hand, leg for a leg, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, and then he says life for a life. This is the most important thing. The word ransom means life for a life, equal and corresponding price. Now I'll make it even more simpler. Adam, right? Adam, God tested Adam. Adam sinned, and because Adam sinned, death came into this world, and now everyone started to die. Correct? Now Jesus is the second Adam, the last Adam. So he came onto this earth to give himself as a ransom, which means equal and corresponding price. For whom? For this Adam. An Adam for an Adam. That is what is called as ransom. When Jesus came onto this world, he gave his sinless life back to Adam, restoring back to Adam. Look at this. Adam died, we all die. What will happen if Adam gets back his life? All of his children will once again get back his life. That is what resurrection means. And that was the whole purpose that Jesus came onto this earth, to give himself as a ransom, an Adam for an Adam, a life for a life, so that because of Adam, everyone is dying. And if Adam gets back his life, everyone will get back their life. And that is what Apostle Paul in many a times he said, a life for a life. But and the word ransom in the Old Testament is given in many places. There's many verses over it. But again, you cannot give a wild beast as a ransom, because ransom means equal and corresponding price. If I want to ransom a human being, let me put it across even more easier, even more simpler. We have all been enslaved, and we are in the prison of death. We are in the prison of death. We are prisoners to death, which means all the human beings are prisoners to death, not just one, but everyone are prisoners to death, right? So if everyone is prisoners to death, how can I come out of the prison unless someone from the outside bails me out? Someone from the outside will have to bail me out. But if my fellow member, fellow human being, he cannot bail me out, is because he is also prisoner to death. That is why in Psalms chapter 49 verses 7 it says, a brother cannot give ransom to another brother, which means another human being cannot give his life as a ransom to another human being. So that is it cannot happen. A person from the outside should come and do it. How about an angel? An angel can come and give a life for a life, right? Because the law of God says life for a life, Adam for an Adam. An angel can come and give a life. That also is not possible, because the life of an angel is greater than the life of a human being. It's superior to a human being. So that way it cannot become equal price. It will become a higher price. So the life of an angel also is not possible. How about a life of an animal? Can that work? No. Which is why Paul in the book of Hebrews chapter 10 verses 4, he says the blood of the bulls and the goats were not able to get life back, whether they was not able to redeem people away from sins, is because human life is greater than animal life. It's not equal price, so it cannot be a corresponding price. It cannot be an equal price, which is why, dear brothers and sisters, Jesus Christ had to take a form of a human being, come on this earth, be tested in all ways like a human being is being tested. In every way he was tested, and yet sin was not found. A perfect human being for an imperfect human being, he gave his life as a ransom sacrifice, an equal corresponding price, an Adam for an Adam, a life for a life. And by restoring Adam back to life, his entire humanity will once again be restored back to life. And when will that happen? That will happen in his kingdom. And that is why in the book of Isaiah chapter 13 verses 14 it says, I will ransom them from the power of the grave, which means all the people of this earth will be ransomed back to their life, will get back their life. How? Is because an Adam sinned and everyone died. Exactly like this, the second Adam comes, he obeys. He does not sin. He obeys, and then he gets his life. How did Jesus get his life on his third day? Because he gave his life as a ransom sacrifice, right? How could he have got his life back? Did God say, okay, now that you've given your sacrifice, get here's your life? That's not what God did. Remember the law. The law said, if you do the law, if you fulfill the law, you will get back your life. That's what God gave the law first. Jesus fulfilled all the laws. He did not even break a single law of the Old Testament. In fact, Jesus came during the time of the Old Testament. It was the New Testament was written only after him. People misunderstand. They think Jesus is the New Testament and everything else is the Old Testament. No, he came during the time when the law was still intact, and he fulfilled all the laws. Because he fulfilled all the laws, he got back his life. But then he gave his life as a ransom for an Adam to Adam. So every man, every person, both the just and the unjust, will be resurrected back to life. That is what it says in First Corinthians chapter 15, verses 21 and 22. Also, chapter 15, verses 45. That as in Adam every man died, so in Christ every man will be raised back to life. Again, in John chapter 5, verses 28 and 29, it says that there will come a time when everyone who is in the grave will hear the voice of God, will hear the voice of Christ, and they will come back to life. How? Is because Jesus paid the price, a ransom sacrifice. We keep telling, right? He died for us, he died for me, he died for my sins. How? We say that he died for everyone. 2000 years ago, he's died for my children who has not yet been born. How? Is because an Adam for an Adam. He gave this life for another life. An Adam for an Adam. If Adam gets back his life, all his generation, all his people, everyone born of Adam, they will also get back their life. This is the work that Jesus came to fulfill. Jesus came to do. That is why, dear brothers and sisters, he had to offer up this sacrifice. And this is not the only place where it is mentioned. Right from Genesis till the last book of the Old Testament, the book of Malkiah, it is mentioned about the sacrifice of Jesus in various ways, in many different aspects. In fact, while the Hebrew people, the Jews, were traveling in the wilderness, they built a tabernacle. You remember, in the wilderness, they built a tabernacle to worship God. The tabernacle completely portrayed Jesus, and that Apostle Paul, he writes in the book of Hebrews, and he compares Jesus to the high priest in the tabernacle. We will talk about that in the coming days. But the most important thing and the most important lesson for us to know today is, as Christians, unless we know this truth, is it's will not be able to understand many teachings of Christ. The truth is, Jesus Christ gave himself as a ransom for an Adam, and he paid that price. Is because according to the law, a life for a life was needed for human beings to be restored, and that is why Christ came on to this earth to fulfill it. Let us keep this in our minds and in our hearts, and the next week we will once again meet up with another interesting discourse on something similar, and something that is going to edify us and bring us closer to the word of God. May God bless us all, and I thank him for giving us this time, and all of you all for paying attention and spending this hour in meditating upon his words and hearing his words. May God bless us all. Amen.